Mayor Pete Buttigieg, of course, the former presidential candidate, on the worries about that. Mayor, very good to have you. I was thinking about you because I finished recently your book, Trust, America's Best Chance. And while we didn't get into the violence issues per se, one of the things that stands out is the fact that there comes a time when people just have to kind of calm down, look back at our past, look to getting over our differences. I don't know if tonight's going to be the night for that, or even this week. Are you worried when you see what you're seeing now with stores boarding things up, worried that it could get nasty?
Well, I think there is that concern, and I appreciate you taking an interest in what I was writing about, the importance of the role of those who lose, accepting the results. That's actually one of the most important functions in democracy. Look, I've been in elections where I win and elections where I've lost, and obviously winning's a lot more fun. But we need to accept the results of what our democratic system has presented us with. I don't care which side you're on or who got the upper hand. That's just fundamental to who we are. I do believe that we're capable of doing this. Look, this country's held elections during pandemics, during wars, and we've come through it. But there are going to be a lot of people, either way, who will be upset. And I'm also concerned that if we don't get results right away, some folks might get more and more agitated. We got to remember that if it's taking a little while to get a final result, that's because people are doing their job, counting the ballots with integrity, making sure every ballot gets counted.
You do address in the book about social media, which was interesting, the timing, because I assume you wrote this before all the latest dust-ups and the concerns, and whether Facebook, Twitter, some of these others are deliberately biased against conservatives. I don't want to get into that as much as I want to get into how a Biden administration, if it came to that, I know that's your wish, way too early to tell whether it's going to happen, should they be policed beyond just the bias issue, or to the fact that they've gotten too big for their britches and that they feed this uproar on either side?
Yeah, so there's a whole set of issues around tech that are going to have to, they're going to require a lot of policy work. One of them is the monopoly issue, right? The fact that they've gotten so big that they're using that to crush competition. There's a case against Google on this basis, but they're not the only tech company that's going to face these issues. And we do need, I think, to get more serious about monopoly law. That's kind of separate from the other issue you raised, which is what's going on with the content. Obviously, some really complicated First Amendment issues here because free speech is so important. And at the same time, I think these companies really have to bear some responsibility for what they amplify, in the same way that your network or a newspaper or a magazine bears some liability if they publish something that's slanderous or libelous or inciting. The tech companies kind of want to have it both ways, right? They want to say, we're just like a bulletin board. We don't take any responsibility. We're just, where people put things, and it's got nothing to do with us. And at the same time, they actually make more money when it's more controversial, because that's what our eyeballs go to. That's how the algorithms work. I do think we're going to have an updated theory of liability, not a government saying what you can or can't do or say. That would be wrong under the First Amendment, but just a different level of responsibility for these companies on the sorts of stuff they push, especially if it's misinformation doing harm.
When we talk about the results tonight, Mayor, and how long it could drag on, and you say it's incumbent on each side, obviously, to practice and really try to live up to just waiting until the results are final. But this could drag on for quite a while if there are lawsuits. I was reading somewhere, I could be wrong there, that there are better than 200 lawsuits that have been pre-filed in various states to challenge whatever the results are. That means this could make the 2000 experience seem like a cakewalk. How do you urge both sides just to calm down?
Yeah, I think, again, it's partly by appealing to our American values. The idea that even as bitterly divided as we've gotten to be politically, we have a fundamental commitment to the idea of democracy, that the voters decide. And, there is going to be a lot of noise. My hope is we'll have a decisive result fairly soon, but that really comes down to a handful of states, and we just don't know yet. And so I think it's a matter of remembering that we're going to get through this. Of course, I'm worried about the president's supporters who may struggle to accept the fact that he's always been underwater on approval, and yet I think many of them would be shocked to see him lose. On our side, of course, there would be enormous concern about people who feel like their safety as Americans is at stake if there were to be 4 more years under this president. But at the end of the day, this is why we have an election. And I believe this is why we're going to win the election. But at the end of the day, this is about the voters, not about, who declares what or what kind of noise politicians make. I'm also concerned about the court cases, especially if they have the effect of trying to stop valid voters from having their votes counted. I think that's obviously only a strategy you would adopt if you think you're not going to win over most voters. And my hope is at the end, at the end of all this, we reach the conclusion that the best way for campaigns to strategize is around persuading voters, not discouraging or discounting votes.
Yeah, and everyone stay calm in the process. Mayor Pete Buttigieg, it's very, very nice having you. Thank you for taking the time, sir.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.